Okay, guys, we're going to look at indicator 7.3 today, and this is a part two of what we did yesterday. This will wrap up 7.3. And 7.3, part two, is going to deal with the Pacific Theater and the end of the war. Moving on, let's look at our learning objective questions for this lesson. First off, you want to explain the events of the Pacific Theater leading to the end of the war in the Pacific. And you'll want to answer these questions too at the end once you've gone through the video and taken the notes, and then you want to go back and answer these three questions. Make sure you put these questions on your note sheet. So when you finish, make sure that you do that. Put the answers on there, and then, of course, make sure that it's turned in. So we're going to explain the events of the Pacific Theater leading to the end of the war in the Pacific. We're going to explain the development of the atomic bomb and where and when it was used. And we're also going to look at what led to the surrender of the Japanese and what happens to Japan after the war is over with. So please make sure you address those questions at the end of the video. So let's look at the Pacific Theater. We talked about the European theater and how eventually all of that comes to an end in World War II. Now we're going to look at what goes on in the Pacific. Remember, the United States is fighting the Japanese in the Pacific. One of the things that is very common for this theater is the idea of island hopping. And island hopping, again, is where the United States was going to take one island at a time to get closer to Japan. Remember, after Pearl Harbor, the United States has been damaged, especially their Navy, and it's going to take us a little bit to rebuild. But once we get back on our feet after Pearl Harbor, we're going to start this campaign of island hopping. And again, the goal is to get as close to Japan as possible to eventually launch an invasion. So that's what island hopping was, going from island to island and trying to get as close to Japan as possible. So you want to make sure that you write that down. One of the major battles that's going to take place during this campaign is the Battle of Coral Sea. Main thing you need to know about the Battle of Coral Sea was that it was one of the very first air-sea battles using aircraft carriers and airplanes. The United States is going to really technically come to a draw. Some people consider it a loss to the Japanese, but the thing that it does is that it shows that we can still fight. And it also shows the Japanese that they are not going to be able to advance any further, which most of Southeast Asia had been taken over by the Japanese. And if the United States doesn't sort of halt the advance of the Japanese at this point at the Battle of the Coral Sea, then that meant that the Japanese could eventually move on to Australia, which was a major base for the United States to stage a lot of the campaigns that were going to come. One of those campaigns is going to be Guadalcanal. The reason Guadalcanal is so important to the Pacific Theater is that it was the first big Allied offensive against the Japanese. Of course, the Japanese are going to be defeated. They're going to lose a lot of men during Guadalcanal, and it shows that the United States is definitely on the right path to starting that island hopping campaign from there on in. The turning point of the war by many historians is the Battle of Midway. The United States is going to take out 4 Japanese aircraft carriers at the Battle of Midway. The United States has figured out some of the weaknesses of the Japanese Zero airplanes. They don't have a lot of metal underneath, and if the American pilots can get underneath and hit some of those weak points on those Japanese Zeros would explode. If you don't know what a Japanese Zero is, it's their airplanes. It's the one with the big red dots on them. So, Battle of Midway, turning point of the war. Again, we destroyed 4 Japanese aircraft carriers. I think they only had 8. That took out almost half of their aircraft carriers during that battle, which was a major win for the United States. Last thing on here is Iwo Jima and Okinawa. Occur in February and March of 1945. Towards the end of the war, the United States begins to advance towards Japan. Iwo Jima and Okinawa are at the doorstep of the main island of Japan. It showed in these battles that the Japanese were willing to fight till the death. It shows their mentality, their perseverance, and that the capture of these islands were crucial. And the reason for that is because it's going to allow us to set up bases that we can eventually plan our invasion of Japan. So it was important to take both of these islands. Okinawa was probably the most bloodiest fighting of the entire war in the Pacific. And Iwo Jima also very bloody. This is when they raised the flag, which you see here pictured. But some real intense fighting showed the willingness of the Japanese to not surrender. This is a nice little map that sort of walks you through the path of the United States as they move through Southeast Asia and eventually towards Japan. And of course, the ones that I mentioned, Guadalcanal, you can see Coral Sea on there. You can see Iwo Jima and Okinawa and how close they were to Japan. And then eventually the dropping of the atomic bomb in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But here's Okinawa, here's Iwo Jima, here's Guadalcanal, which you see here, here's Coral Sea. So you can get a general idea about where these places were. The ending of the war comes swift with the dropping of the atomic bomb at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The first bomb is going to be dropped on August the 6th, 1945. But all of this starts with a project known as the Manhattan Project. And this is the development of the atomic bomb. So you definitely want to make sure you write that down. It was the development of the atomic bomb. They started testing the atomic bomb in the deserts, mainly in New Mexico. You're going to read a little bit about that in an assignment later on, but they're going to develop and test the atomic bomb in the deserts of New Mexico. The leader of the Manhattan Project was a guy named Robert Oppenheimer. Oppenheimer is spelled Oppenheimer. He is considered the developer of the atomic bomb and the leader of the Manhattan Project. The first bombs, again, dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The first one, August 6, 1945. The Japanese were warned. They still didn't surrender. And so the United States drops another one 3 days later on August 9th, 1945 at Nagasaki. The reason why both of these towns were chosen was mainly because of they were industrial complex, meaning that they were making and producing things for the war. And of course, the United States wanted to knock those things out. After the second bomb was dropped on Nagasaki, the Japanese are going to surrender on August the 15th. The reason why the bombs were dropped was to really cut down on the loss of American lives if we had to invade Japan. What Iwo Jima and Okinawa showed us was that the Japanese would fight till the end, fight till the death. And so we wanted to prevent any more U.S. casualties. Therefore, Harry Truman, who's the president at this time, chooses to drop the atomic bomb. After the bombs are dropped and Japan surrenders, then the United States is going to occupy Japan. They're going to demilitarize Japan, meaning that they are not going to have a military. And the United States learned lessons from World War I. They knew that they needed to help and assist after the war was over with. And so in Japan, the United States provided aid and supervision to help rebuild Japan. And this time they're going to help rebuild Japan as a democracy. World War II comes to an end with VJ Day, which is on September the 2nd, 1945. This is the official end of the war and the ending of the war in the Pacific. And you need to know what VJ Day is, so please make sure you understand that's Victory over Japan, September 2nd, 1945. Okay, now back to your learning objective questions. Please make sure you record these on your note sheet and that you answer these questions. And once you're done, make sure that I have checked these off and you have marked as done on Google Classroom. That will end indicator 7.3, and we're going to start preparing for a quiz. So again, you'll see some study guide questions coming up too. So make sure you answer those and you start preparing for this quiz on 7.3. Okay, catch you guys later on.